The black woman found the rancher injured in the field, lightning splitting the sky as he whispered, "Don't worry," through bloodied lips, and she knelt in the mud, her voice steady against the storm. "You won't be alone." The frontier town sees her as nothing more than an uppity schoolteacher destined to flee back east within months, dismissed by families who question her credentials and shopkeepers who refuse her service. They whisper she'll never survive the harsh realities of the untamed West. But the wounded cattleman owns secrets that could transform her from unwanted outsider into the most powerful person in the territory, if the conspiracy that nearly killed him doesn't destroy them both first. Hidden beneath their growing partnership lies a web of murder and stolen fortunes that threatens to consume anyone who dares uncover the truth. Will courage and intelligence triumph over prejudice and deadly corruption, or will they become the next victims of forces determined to bury the past forever? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in Cedar Ridge, Colorado territory, kicking up dust that settled on Sadie Turner's dark blue traveling dress. She stepped down with her leather satchel and trunk, surveying the collection of weathered buildings that would be her new home. The driver tossed her belongings to the ground without ceremony. "Good luck, miss," he said, not meeting her eyes. The horses pulled away before she could respond. 3 men lounged outside the general store, their conversation stopping as they studied her. One spat into the dirt. Sadie lifted her chin and walked toward the building marked "Rooms for Rent." The proprietor, a thin woman with graying hair, looked up from her ledger. Her face hardened when she saw Sadie. "We're full up." Sadie glanced at the keys hanging behind the counter. "I see several rooms available." "Those are reserved." "For whom?" The woman's mouth tightened. "Folks who belong here." Sadie set a silver dollar on the counter. "I'm the new schoolteacher. The position was arranged through the Territorial Education Board." "That may be, but I don't have to house you." A man stepped forward from the corner. He wore a clean shirt and carried himself with quiet authority. "Mrs. Fletcher, the lady needs lodging. Surely you can manage something." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes darted between them. "Doc Harrison, this ain't your concern." "It is, if she's here to teach our children." He tipped his hat to Sadie. "I'm Dr. Harrison. Welcome to Cedar Ridge." Sadie nodded gratefully. "Thank you, doctor." Mrs. Fletcher snatched the silver dollar. "Back room. 1 week. No visitors." The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and washstand. Sadie set her trunk down and opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in her best dress, lay a bundle of letters tied with string. One bore the seal of a Denver law firm. She tucked them into her satchel without reading them. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a modest building with broken windows and a sagging roof. Inside, dust covered everything. Sadie rolled up her sleeves and began sweeping. By afternoon, she had cleaned 3 desks when voices carried through the open door. 2 women stood outside, arms crossed. "I won't have my children taught by her kind," one said. "The territorial board must have made a mistake," replied the other. Sadie continued working, her movements steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. She had heard such words before, in Philadelphia, in the towns along her journey west. They no longer surprised her. That evening she walked to the general store for supplies. The clerk, a young man with nervous eyes, served her quickly but charged double the posted prices. Sadie paid without comment. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she hurried back toward her lodgings. The first drops of rain fell as she passed the last building at the edge of town. A horse's whinny made her stop. Lightning illuminated a field beside the road, and she saw a dark shape lying motionless in the grass. Another flash revealed a man sprawled face down, his hat several feet away. Sadie dropped her supplies and ran toward him. Rain began falling harder as she knelt beside the still figure. Blood matted his dark hair where his head had struck a rock. His breathing was shallow but steady. She pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse, strong and regular. The man's eyelids fluttered open, revealing gray eyes clouded with pain. Don't worry, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. Sadie stripped off her shawl and pressed it to the wound on his head. You won't be alone. His eyes focused on her face for a moment before closing again. Sadie looked back toward town, then at the injured man. She couldn't move him alone. Help! She called toward the distant lights. Someone's hurt! The rain intensified, soaking through her dress. She maintained pressure on the wound and called again. Finally, a lantern bobbed in the darkness. Dr. Harrison approached with 2 other men. What happened? Harrison knelt beside her, his practiced hands checking the man's injuries. I found him like this. His horse must have thrown him. One of the other men held up the lantern. That's Caleb Dawson, owns the Sunset Ranch. Harrison nodded grimly. We need to get him inside. Carefully now. They carried Dawson to Harrison's office behind the general store. Sadie followed, wringing water from her shawl. Harrison worked over the unconscious man while she waited in the corner, ignored by the others who had gathered. He'll live, Harrison announced finally. Nasty knock to the head, but no fracture. The men began to file out, their duty done. Harrison glanced at Sadie. Thank you. You may have saved his life. She nodded and stepped into the rain. Behind her, through the window, she could see Caleb Dawson lying still on Harrison's examination table. Tomorrow, she would face the school children and their reluctant parents. Tonight, she had kept a promise to a stranger. The storm raged on as she made her way back to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, carrying her soggy supplies and wondering what morning would bring. 3 days passed before Caleb Dawson appeared at the schoolhouse door. His head bore a fresh bandage, but his gray eyes were alert. Sadie looked up from the arithmetic lesson she was preparing. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, removing his hat. No thanks necessary. Anyone would have done the same. Caleb's mouth quirked upward. Not anyone would have stayed in that storm. The few children who had shown up for school that week watched curiously from their desks. Most families had kept their children home, waiting to see if the new teacher would prove herself worthy. You're Miss Turner, the school teacher. I am. I'm Caleb Dawson. I hear you saved my life. Sadie set down her chalk. Dr. Harrison saved your life. I simply called for help. In a lightning storm, while others stayed indoors. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. Are you here about enrolling a child? No children yet. I came to invite you to Sunday dinner at my ranch. It's the least I can do. Before Sadie could respond, footsteps echoed on the schoolhouse steps. Eli Baker entered with 2 other council members. His eyes moved between Sadie and Caleb with obvious displeasure. Mr. Dawson, recovering well, I see. Well enough, thanks to Miss Turner here. Baker's smile looked forced. Yes, we heard about her heroic rescue. Miss Turner, we need to discuss your teaching methods. Several parents have concerns. Caleb settled his hat back on his head. I'll expect you Sunday at noon, Miss Turner. My housekeeper makes excellent roast beef. He nodded to the council members and left. Baker watched him go, his jaw tight. That was inappropriate, Baker said when Caleb was gone. A woman in your position must be above reproach. Sadie faced the 3 men. My position is teaching children to read and write, nothing more. Your position is whatever this community decides it is. That evening, a telegram arrived for Sadie at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. The proprietor handed it over with obvious reluctance. The message was brief. Urgent legal matter requires immediate attention. Come to Denver or authorize representative. Sadie folded the telegram and tucked it into her satchel with the unopened letters. Whatever business awaited in Denver would have to wait. She had students to teach and a place to earn in this unwelcoming town. Sunday arrived gray and windy. Sadie borrowed Mrs. Fletcher's buggy and followed Caleb's directions to the Sunset Ranch. The house surprised her with its size and obvious prosperity. A woman emerged from the kitchen as Caleb helped Sadie down from the buggy. Miss Turner, this is my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez. The older woman smiled warmly. The lady who helped our senior Caleb. Welcome to our home. The dining room held a table that could seat 12, though only 2 places were set. Caleb had changed from his work clothes into a clean white shirt and dark jacket. He looked younger without the hat shadowing his face. "How long have you owned the ranch?" Sadie asked as Mrs. Rodriguez served the promised roast beef. "My father started it 20 years ago. I took over last year when he passed. I'm sorry for your loss." Caleb's expression darkened briefly. His death was unexpected. He was found in one of the far pastures, thrown from his horse like I was. But he wasn't as fortunate. How terrible. The strange thing was he rarely rode alone to that area, and he was an excellent horseman. Caleb shook his head. But accidents happen, I suppose. After dinner, he showed her around the property. The ranch stretched for miles with good grazing land and access to a clear stream. Cattle dotted the hillsides, fat and healthy. "It's beautiful," Sadie said, meaning it. "It could be profitable, too, with the right management. But I'm having trouble with some of the neighboring ranchers. They want to buy me out. Are you interested in selling?" "Never. This land is my family's legacy." That evening, back in her cramped room, Sadie finally opened the letters from Denver. The first was dated 3 months earlier, the second from just 2 weeks ago. Both were signed by the same lawyer, Jonathan Mills. Her hands trembled as she read. Her former employer in Philadelphia, Marcus Whitfield, had died the previous winter. In his will, he had left Sadie a substantial inheritance, 3,000 acres of Colorado Territory land, along with all mineral and water rights. The property was located adjacent to the Sunset Ranch. Sadie read the letters twice before their meaning fully sank in. She was no longer a penniless schoolteacher dependent on the town's grudging acceptance. She was a landowner with rights and resources that rivaled any man in the territory. The implications staggered her. Whitfield had been her employer for 5 years, a progressive businessman who had funded her education and encouraged her dreams of teaching in the West. She had never imagined he would remember her so generously. But why hadn't he told her about the land during his lifetime? And why Colorado Territory, so far from his Philadelphia business interests? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Fletcher stood in the hallway, her expression sour as always. "Man here to see you. Says he's from Denver." Downstairs, a thin man in an expensive suit waited in the parlor. He rose when Sadie entered. "Miss Turner, I'm Jonathan Mills, your late employer's attorney. I've been trying to reach you about your inheritance." Sadie glanced at Mrs. Fletcher, who lingered nearby with obvious curiosity. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Mills nodded toward the door. "Is there somewhere more suitable for business discussion?" They walked to the schoolhouse, where Mills spread legal documents across her desk. Maps, deeds, and survey reports covered every surface. "Mr. Whitfield purchased this land specifically for you," Mills explained. "He believed you would need resources to establish yourself in the West. He was quite insistent about the location." "Did he say why?" "He mentioned strategic value. The land controls water access for much of this valley." Sadie studied the maps. Her property formed a horseshoe around the northern and eastern borders of the Sunset Ranch. Without access to her water sources, Caleb's cattle would struggle during dry seasons. "There's one more thing," Mills said quietly. "Mr. Whitfield didn't die naturally. He was investigating some irregularities in Western land transactions when he suffered what appeared to be a heart attack." "Appeared to be?" "The circumstances were suspicious. He had received several threatening letters about his inquiries." Sadie felt cold despite the warm evening. "What kind of inquiries? Fraudulent sales, forged documents, disputed mineral rights. He believed there was organized corruption in territorial land offices." Mills packed up his documents as darkness fell. Before leaving, he handed Sadie a small brass key. "This opens a safety deposit box in Denver. Mr. Whitfield's final instructions were very specific. If anything happened to him, you were to have everything." After he left, Sadie sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, trying to process what she had learned. Tomorrow she would face the town as more than just an unwanted teacher. She would face them as a landowner whose property could make or break every ranch in the valley. The question was whether that would make her more welcome or more dangerous. Word of Sadie's inheritance spread through Cedar Ridge faster than wildfire. By Monday morning, Mrs. Fletcher had prepared a full breakfast without being asked. The general store clerk smiled broadly and offered his finest goods at reduced prices. Even the children who had been kept from school began appearing at her door. Sadie accepted the sudden attention with quiet dignity, but she recognized it for what it was: fear disguised as friendliness. Eli Baker arrived at the schoolhouse during the lunch hour, flanked by 2 other council members. His smile stretched too wide across his weathered face. "Miss Turner, we owe you an apology. Perhaps we were too hasty in our initial judgments." Sadie continued grading arithmetic papers. "Children learn regardless of their teacher's social standing, Mr. Baker." Of course. We'd like to discuss expanding the school program. Perhaps a new building, more supplies. That would benefit the students." Baker leaned forward eagerly. "We understand you've come into some property. Quite a windfall for someone so young." Mr. Whitfield was generous. "Indeed. We're curious about your plans for the land. Development, perhaps. Mining interests have expressed significant enthusiasm for this region." Sadie set down her pen and met his gaze. "My plans involve education, Mr. Baker. Nothing more." His smile faltered slightly. "Surely you understand the economic potential. A woman of your intelligence must see the opportunities." "I see the need for children to read and write. Everything else is secondary." After Baker left, Sadie walked to her property line. The land stretched beyond what she could see, rolling hills covered in grass and wildflowers. A stream ran clear and cold along the eastern boundary, the same water source that fed Caleb's ranch. She knelt by the stream and cupped the water in her hands. It tasted clean and sweet, without the metallic tang that often plagued western springs. No wonder men would kill for control of it. That evening, Caleb appeared at her door carrying a leather portfolio. Mrs. Fletcher showed him to the tiny parlor with exaggerated courtesy. "I heard about your inheritance," he said without preamble. "News travels quickly here." "It does when it affects water rights for half the valley." He opened the portfolio and spread out hand-drawn maps. "I've been surveying the boundaries. Your land surrounds mine on 3 sides." Sadie studied the carefully marked boundaries. "You're concerned about access. I'm concerned about survival. Without that stream, my cattle won't last through a dry summer." "And you think I'll cut off your water?" Caleb's gray eyes searched her face. "I think you're the first person in this territory with the power to help or destroy me. I'm hoping you'll choose help." She traced the stream's path on his map. "What are you proposing?" "Partnership. Your water rights, my grazing land and cattle knowledge. We could build something neither of us could manage alone." The proposal made sense from a business perspective, but Sadie heard something else in his voice. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. "I'll consider it. There's something else you should know." Caleb's voice dropped lower. "My father's death wasn't an accident." Sadie's hand stilled on the map. "What do you mean?" "He was investigating irregularities in land sales before he died. Someone wanted him quiet." "Do you have proof?" "Nothing that would stand up in court, but I found his notes hidden in the barn. He suspected a group of local businessmen were forging documents and stealing mineral rights." "Did he name anyone specifically?" Eli Baker topped the list. They sat in silence while Mrs. Fletcher's clock ticked loudly from the hall. Finally, Sadie rolled up the maps and handed them back. "We should discuss this partnership further. Perhaps tomorrow evening?" Relief flickered across Caleb's face. "I'll bring dinner. Mrs. Rodriguez makes excellent tamales." After he left, Sadie climbed to her cramped room and pulled out the brass key Mills had given her. She turned it over in her palm, wondering what secrets lay waiting in that Denver safety deposit box. The next morning brought drought, not the gradual drying that ranchers planned for, but a sudden, brutal heat that cracked the earth and sent cattle searching desperately for water. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees. Sadie dismissed school early and walked to her stream. The water level had dropped noticeably overnight. If this continued, there wouldn't be enough for both her land and Caleb's cattle. She found him there already, kneeling by the bank with worry etched across his face. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad. I'll lose half my herd if this keeps up." Sadie made a decision that surprised them both. "Move your cattle to my north pasture. The stream runs deeper there." He looked up sharply. "That's generous, but I can't pay you market rate for grazing rights." "We're partners now. Partners help each other." That afternoon they worked together, moving cattle to higher ground near the deeper water. Sadie proved surprisingly capable with the animals, her calm voice and steady movements earning their trust. As the sun began to set, painting the sky deep orange, they sat on a fallen log watching the relocated herd drink their fill. "Where did you learn to handle cattle?" Caleb asked. "My grandfather raised livestock in Pennsylvania. I spent summers on his farm." "You're full of surprises. Most people never bother to ask about my background. They make assumptions instead." Caleb studied her profile in the fading light. "I'm learning not to make assumptions about you." That night, Sadie wrote a letter to Jonathan Mills requesting immediate travel to Denver. Whatever evidence Whitfield had left in that safety deposit box might be the key to understanding the conspiracy that had killed 2 men. She sealed the letter and set it on her nightstand. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey that would either expose the truth or make her the next target. Outside her window, thunder rumbled in the distance, but no rain came. The drought continued, and with it, the pressure that would force everyone in Cedar Ridge to choose sides. The game had begun in earnest, and Sadie Turner was no longer content to be a pawn. The Denver First National Bank stood like a fortress of red brick and iron bars. Sadie climbed the marble steps with the brass key clutched in her gloved hand. Inside, electric lights cast harsh shadows across polished floors that clicked under her boots. The bank manager, a portly man with wire spectacles, examined her identification documents with suspicious thoroughness. He led her through a maze of corridors to the safety deposit vault, where hundreds of metal boxes lined the walls like tiny coffins. Box 247 opened with a soft click. Inside, Sadie found a thick envelope sealed with red wax and a smaller leather journal bound with string. She carried both to a private viewing room, her heart pounding as she broke the seal. Marcus Whitfield's final letter was written in his careful script. His words chilled her to the bone. He had discovered a network of corruption stretching from Colorado Territory to Washington itself. Land patents were being forged, mineral surveys falsified, and legitimate owners murdered or driven away. The journal contained names, dates, and detailed accounts of fraudulent transactions. Eli Baker's name appeared on every page, along with 3 other Cedar Ridge businessmen and a territorial land commissioner named Harrison Polk. Most shocking was the entry dated just 2 weeks before Whitfield's death. He had traced the conspiracy to its source and planned to expose it through congressional hearings. Someone had learned of his intentions and silenced him permanently. Sadie read every page twice before the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Her inherited land wasn't just valuable for its water and grazing rights. Survey reports hidden in the journal's back pages revealed massive silver deposits running beneath both her property and Caleb's ranch. The conspirators had killed Caleb's father to prevent him from discovering the silver. They had murdered Whitfield to stop his investigation. Now they were trying to acquire both properties through legal challenges and intimidation. She was next on their list. The train journey back to Cedar Ridge gave her time to plan. Whitfield had been methodical in gathering evidence, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had worked alone, trusting no one with his discoveries until it was too late. Sadie wouldn't repeat his error. She needed allies, and she needed them fast. She found Caleb waiting at the Cedar Ridge depot with a borrowed buggy. His face brightened when he saw her, then grew serious as he noted her grim expression. "Bad news from Denver?" "Worse than we imagined. Drive us somewhere private. We need to talk." They rode in silence to a grove of cottonwoods beside the stream. Sadie spread Whitfield's evidence across a fallen log, while Caleb read over her shoulder. His jaw tightened with each revelation. "Silver under our land," he said finally. "That's what they killed my father for, and why they'll kill us if we let them." Caleb stood and paced to the water's edge. "Half the town council is involved. How do we fight that?" With the law, Whitfield documented everything. We take this to the territorial governor. The territorial governor appointed Harrison Polk. He might be involved too. Sadie had considered that possibility during the long train ride. Then we go to Washington. Whitfield had contacts in Congress. That could take months. They won't wait that long. As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on the ridge above them. Eli Baker led 3 men down the slope at a steady pace. They weren't hurrying, which somehow made their approach more menacing. Sadie quickly gathered the evidence and stuffed it into her traveling bag. Caleb moved to stand beside her, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Baker reined in 20 feet away, his men spreading out in a loose semicircle. His false smile was nowhere in evidence. "Miss Turner, Mr. Dawson, enjoying the evening air?" "Just discussing ranch business," Caleb replied evenly. "I'm sure you were. Miss Turner, I understand you made a trip to Denver. Business or pleasure?" "Personal matters." "Of course. I hope you found everything in order. Sometimes old documents can be confusing, especially for someone unfamiliar with territorial law." Sadie met his gaze without flinching. "I found everything quite clear, thank you." Baker's horse shifted restlessly, sensing its rider's tension. "Clear can be dangerous, Miss Turner. This territory has a way of humbling those who think they understand it too quickly." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Baker?" "Merely offering friendly advice. Accidents happen frequently out here. Horse falls, equipment failures, unfortunate encounters with wildlife." His eyes flicked to Caleb. "Just ask the Dawson family." Caleb's hand moved closer to his gun, but Sadie touched his arm in warning. They were outnumbered and exposed. This wasn't the time for confrontation. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." "I hope so. For your sake." Baker gathered his reins. "Good evening." The 4 men rode away at the same measured pace, disappearing over the ridge like shadows. Sadie realized she had been holding her breath. "They know," Caleb said quietly. "Not everything. If they knew about the journal, we'd be dead already." "What's our next move?" Sadie shouldered her bag and walked toward the buggy. "We find out who we can trust. Dr. Harrison helped me that first night. He might listen to reason." "And if he's involved too?" "Then we're in more trouble than I thought." They drove back to town as darkness fell. Lights flickered in windows along the main street, creating an illusion of peaceful domesticity. But Sadie now saw Cedar Ridge through different eyes. Behind those warm facades lurked corruption and murder. At Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, Sadie paused before climbing down from the buggy. "Caleb, there's something else. Whitfield's letter mentioned a witness to your father's murder. Someone who saw what really happened but was too frightened to come forward." His hands tightened on the reins. "Did he say who?" "A woman. She's been hiding somewhere in the territory ever since." "What woman? My father knew everyone for 50 miles. Sadie hesitated, remembering the careful way Whitfield had phrased his final paragraphs. Someone with reason to fear Baker's men. Someone who had already lost everything once before. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "My sister. Martha's alive." Whitfield seemed to think so. And if she is, she's been watching this whole time, waiting for someone brave enough to help her seek justice. The implications hung between them like a challenge. Somewhere in the darkness surrounding Cedar Ridge, a frightened woman held the key to exposing the conspiracy that had destroyed 2 families. Now they just had to find her before Baker's men did. The search for Martha began at dawn. Sadie and Caleb rode north toward the abandoned mining camps that dotted the mountainside like forgotten scars. Whitfield's journal had mentioned caves where frightened witnesses might hide from Baker's reach. The first 3 camps yielded nothing but rusted equipment and collapsed timber. At the 4th site, Caleb found fresh footprints in the mud near a natural spring. Small boots recently made. A woman's tracks. "She's been here," he said, kneeling beside the clear impressions. Sadie studied the surrounding rocks. Those caves lead deep into the mountain. She could be anywhere. They called Martha's name into the echoing darkness, their voices bouncing off stone walls. No answer came, but Sadie noticed something the others had missed. Fresh scratches on the cave entrance, as if someone had been moving supplies. "Martha!" Caleb called again. "It's safe. Sadie's with me. She has evidence about Father's death." A stone rattled somewhere in the depths. Then silence. Sadie stepped forward. "Martha, I know you're frightened, but we can protect you now. We have proof of what Baker did." More silence. Then, so faint they almost missed it, a woman's voice. "Caleb?" "I'm here, Martha. Come out, please." The woman who emerged from the shadows bore little resemblance to the vibrant girl Caleb remembered. Martha Dawson had aged years in the months since her disappearance. Her clothes were patched and worn, her dark hair streaked with premature gray. But her eyes still held the intelligence that had once made her the pride of Cedar Ridge. Caleb moved toward his sister with tears on his face, but she held up a warning hand. "Don't. I can't. Not yet. Martha, what happened? Where have you been?" She looked at Sadie with desperate hope. "You said you have proof?" Sadie opened her satchel and withdrew Whitfield's journal. "Everything's documented here. Names, dates, methods. Your father discovered the silver deposits, didn't he?" Martha nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He was so excited. He said we'd be rich, that he could expand the ranch, maybe send me back east to finishing school." "What happened the day he died?" "I followed him to the north pasture. He'd been riding out there every day for weeks, testing soil samples, measuring distances." Martha's hand shook as she spoke. "Baker was waiting for him, with 2 other men." Caleb stepped closer. "You saw them kill him? They made it look like an accident. Spooked his horse, then hit him with a rock when he fell. They saw me watching from the ridge." "Why didn't you come to me?" Martha's laugh held no humor. "Baker told the whole town. I'd run off with a traveling salesman. Said I was always too wild for my own good. Who would have believed me against the town council?" Sadie understood the impossible position Martha had faced. A young woman's word against powerful men meant nothing in territorial courts. "You've been living up here all this time? Moving between camps, staying ahead of Baker's men? They search these mountains regularly, looking for claim jumpers and squatters." Martha's voice grew stronger. "But I've been watching them too, learning their plans." "What plans?" Martha led them deeper into the cave where she had created a makeshift home. Maps covered the stone walls, marked with dates and movements. Supply caches were hidden in natural alcoves. She had been conducting her own investigation for months. "They're planning something big. Baker's been bringing in men from Denver, professional gunfighters. They're going to force everyone off the valuable land, one way or another." Sadie studied the maps. Martha had documented a pattern of intimidation and violence stretching back 2 years. Families driven away, mysterious accidents, legal challenges that always seemed to favor Baker's associates. "How many people are involved?" "At least a dozen locally, plus the Denver connections. They have someone in the territorial government providing false land patents." Caleb examined his sister's evidence with growing amazement. "Martha, this is incredible work. You've done what Father couldn't. Father trusted people. I learned not to. Sadie made a decision that would change everything. We're taking this to the people. All of it. Baker's power comes from working in shadows. We drag everything into the light." "That's suicide," Martha said. "Half the town depends on Baker for their livelihoods. The other half depends on honest ranching and farming. They deserve to know the truth." They spent the afternoon planning. Martha knew which families could be trusted, which businesses were secretly owned by the conspiracy. Her months of observation had revealed the true structure of Cedar Ridge's power. By evening, they had a list of 20 families who might stand with them against Baker's network. Not enough to guarantee victory, but sufficient to demand justice. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would call a town meeting and present the evidence publicly. Force Baker to defend himself in front of witnesses. Create enough pressure to bring in territorial or federal investigators. He'll never let it get that far, Martha warned. He'll try to kill us all first. Then we better make sure everyone knows what's at stake, Sadie replied. As they prepared to leave the cave, Martha caught her brother's arm. Caleb, there's something else. The night Father died, he gave me this. She pulled a small leather pouch from her pocket. He said if anything happened to him, I should take it to the territorial capital. Inside the pouch were 5 silver nuggets, each the size of a walnut, pure metal that gleamed even in the cave's dim light. He found the mother lode, Caleb breathed, worth millions, according to his calculations. That's why Baker had to kill him. Father was going to file claims the next morning. Sadie weighed the nuggets in her palm. They represented more wealth than most people saw in a lifetime. They also represented the motive for multiple murders. Tomorrow, we end this, she said, closing the pouch. One way or another. Martha looked between her brother and the woman who had become their unlikely leader. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her tired eyes. I've been alone so long, I forgot what it felt like to have allies. Caleb embraced his sister carefully. You're not alone anymore. None of us are. As they rode back toward Cedar Ridge, Sadie felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring either justice or catastrophe. There was no middle ground left. The final confrontation was coming, and everything depended on her ability to turn evidence into action before Baker's guns could silence them forever. The town meeting was called for Saturday evening in the church, the only building large enough to hold the entire population of Cedar Ridge. Word spread quickly through careful whispers and trusted messengers. Sadie spent Friday visiting families one by one, sharing carefully chosen pieces of evidence. Dr. Harrison was the first to pledge his support. He had suspected foul play and several deaths, but lacked proof to challenge Baker's authority. Mrs. Rodriguez and 3 other Mexican families agreed to attend despite the obvious danger. They had suffered under Baker's intimidation longer than most. By Saturday afternoon, tension crackled through the town like electricity before a storm. Baker's men lounged outside the saloon, their eyes tracking everyone who entered the church. Sadie recognized 2 faces from the Denver train station, professional gunfighters imported for this confrontation. Martha remained hidden in the abandoned mining camp, ready to flee if the meeting went wrong. Her testimony would be crucial, but her safety mattered more than justice. Caleb checked his pistol one final time before they walked toward the church. The sanctuary filled slowly as families arrived in small groups. Ranchers sat beside shop owners, their faces grim with worry and determination. Baker entered with his 5 closest allies, claiming the front pew like a throne of authority. Sadie stood at the pulpit with Whitfield's journal open before her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice carried clear and strong when she began. We gather tonight because 2 good men died for discovering the truth about our land. Thomas Dawson and Marcus Whitfield were murdered to protect a conspiracy that has stolen from every honest family in this territory. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Baker rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. This is preposterous. Thomas died in a riding accident. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what you told them to know. Sadie held up the journal. But the truth is documented here, in the words of a man who died trying to expose your crimes. She read from Whitfield's careful notes, detailing forged patents, falsified surveys, and systematic theft of mineral rights. With each revelation, the audience grew more restless. Several families had lost property through the exact methods Whitfield described. These are fabrications, Baker declared. The ravings of a sick man trying to destroy honest businessmen. Dr. Harrison stood from the middle pew. Marcus Whitfield was neither sick nor dishonest. I treated him for years. He was as sound of mind as any man I've known. More voices joined the growing chorus of support. Ranchers whose water rights had been challenged. Shopkeepers pressured to sell at below market prices. Families driven away by mysterious accidents and financial ruin. Baker's allies shifted uncomfortably as the tide turned against them. 2 men slipped quietly toward the door, but Caleb blocked their path with a significant look at his gun. You want proof? Sadie called out above the noise. Then hear it from someone who witnessed Thomas Dawson's murder firsthand. The church fell silent. Even Baker looked genuinely surprised as Martha stepped through the side door, her chin high despite her obvious fear. "Martha Dawson died the same night as her father," Baker said quickly. "Everyone knows she ran away with that traveling salesman." "I ran from you," Martha replied, her voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. "After I watched you and your men kill my father for discovering silver on his land." She described that terrible day in stark detail, her words painting a picture of calculated murder disguised as accident. The congregation listened in horrified silence as she revealed months of hiding, watching, documenting the conspiracy's continued operations. Baker's face had gone pale, but he rallied for one final denial. "This woman has been living wild in the mountains. Her mind is clearly affected." Martha pulled out her father's silver nuggets, letting them catch the lamplight as gasps echoed through the church. "My mind was clear enough to save these, the proof of what you killed him for. And clear enough to document every illegal transaction you've conducted since," Sadie added, displaying Martha's carefully drawn maps and notes, "including the names of your associates in Denver and the territorial capital." The evidence was overwhelming. Baker's network of corruption lay exposed like a cancer under bright light. Several of his allies were already moving toward the doors, calculating their chances of escape before territorial marshals arrived. But Baker himself wasn't finished. His hand moved toward his coat, where the outline of a pistol was clearly visible. "You think you've won something here? You think justice matters in this territory?" "I think the truth matters," Sadie replied calmly. "And the truth is that you're outnumbered by decent people who won't stand for murder and theft." Dr. Harrison had positioned himself behind Baker during Martha's testimony. Now he pressed a medical instrument against the man's spine, just hard enough to get his attention. "I wouldn't recommend it, Eli. Not with 50 witnesses watching." Baker's shoulders sagged in defeat. The fight went out of him as completely as air from a punctured balloon. His remaining allies surrendered without resistance, recognizing the futility of their position. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, summoned by telegrams sent to Denver and the capital. Baker and 6 associates were arrested on charges ranging from fraud to murder. The professional gunfighters had already fled, but warrants followed them across state lines. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Sadie and Caleb stood in the same field where she had found him bleeding in the storm. The drought had broken, and green grass pushed through the formerly cracked earth. "Your students are asking when school will resume," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. "Soon. I want to finish the new building first." The silver deposits had proven even richer than Thomas Dawson's estimates. Martha's inheritance would fund the finest school in the territory, along with a library and medical clinic. The Dawson Ranch was expanding into a model operation that other ranchers studied and copied. "Any regrets about leaving Philadelphia?" Caleb asked. Sadie leaned against his shoulder, watching clouds build on the horizon. Good clouds this time, heavy with the promise of rain. "None. I told you that first night you wouldn't be alone. Turns out I was making that promise to myself too." Martha emerged from the ranch house, calling them for dinner. She had taken over managing the mining operation, proving as skilled with business as she had been with investigation. The family was whole again, stronger for having been broken and repaired. That evening, as they sat around Mrs. Rodriguez's table sharing stories and planning for the future, Sadie reflected on the journey that had brought them together. She had come west as a dismissed schoolteacher seeking purpose. She had found partnership, justice, and a love strong enough to transform an entire community. The promise made in a storm-swept field had grown into something larger than any of them had imagined. Cedar Ridge was becoming the kind of place where truth mattered more than power, where courage counted more than corruption. It was exactly the legacy Marcus Whitfield had dreamed of when he left her that inheritance, a foundation for building something better, something worthy of the sacrifices made to achieve it.